What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to my album review of Brian Eno's Ambient 1 Music for Airports, released in 1978. Of course, Brian Eno, the master musician of well-known fame, of course, of Roxy Music, but especially known for his works in ambient music, which this album is probably one of the forerunners, one of the key albums, and the most important albums of the genre. So even though I don't have any song reviews on this one, this is an album that I've known for a long time, and to be honest, I just felt like reviewing it. With only 4 tracks and coming in at about 42 minutes long, this is an experience of an album that I feel you either love it, you hate it, or you feel kind of ambivalent towards the ambient. One thing that drew my curiosity about this album, and actually led me kind of to doing the review of it, I wanted to know Brian Eno's mindsets going into this album. What was he thinking? How did he come to create one of the most important, and possibly the most important, album in ambient music? And in the liner notes for the album, he said that ambient music must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. I think that that is one of the most fascinating quotes from Mr. Eno, especially in relation to this album, because it is an album that you can sit there and listen to it and really give all of your attention towards it, or you can put it in the background, you can forget about it, you can ignore it, you can pretend it's not even there. And it has a really interesting balance of dancing in between the two. And listening to interviews with Eno, it seems that he got these ideas from 2 different experiences in his life. One was when he was in a hospital and he was stuck in the hospital bed, and his friend had put on some music on a record player for him to listen to while they left. And I guess the record player, the volume was a little bit too low, but he couldn't reach over to raise it up, so he decided just to let it kind of go. He was listening to some harp music on the record, and in the background outside it was raining. This beautiful harp music that was just low enough that it kind of perfectly matched the rain, and it kind of inspired him in the movements that this album would eventually make. And then he also talks about his actual experience, as the title of the album suggests, in an airport. And while in the airport, listening to music that was just too much, too loud. Whoever brought in their cassette players and their CDs, it was just whatever pop hits they were putting on. But he wanted to create music that, like we have said, could be interrupted, could be spoken over. You could hear actual important things going on over the music, but if you did want to pay attention to it, it would be there for you. And it could occupy the spaces in between conversations, in between the hustle and the bustle of the airport. He had wanted to create the feeling of being suspended in the universe. So the album is called Music for Airports. Now, I think the airport is the perfect environment for this album. I mean, no doubt. If you ever have the chance, if you're in an airport watching this, if you're going to be in an airport at some point, I highly suggest listening to the first song on the album while you're at the airport. But having the volume at a perfect level where you can still hear what's going on, but the music is just kind of like there in the background. In between the intercom announcements, the rumbling of the trams, the planes going off, background chatter, in between those spaces, this music does a great job of filling those spaces if you're looking for it. All of the music features a very repetitious nature. All of it has a very discrete evolution in the way that the layers are built, in the way that the looping was done, and the production side of things. And it's really funny how some people, in the sporadic nature of the songs and in the dotted tones and how sparse the music is, some people find depth and deep meanings within the music, spiritual journeys in the spaces in between. And others just kind of find, a very okay sound. Take, for example, the first song on the album, 1-1, with its repeated piano line that just slowly drifts along and builds up. It has a small underlying tone of depth. You get some deep tones that come in every once in a while. And I think that this song in particular is the one that really captures the idea of being in an airport. It's like laying on a soft pillow of sounds. The breaks and the rest in between all of the melodies and the cadences kind of leave you wanting more if you're looking for it. And it kind of keeps your mind occupied and waiting and kind of salivating on what comes next. You know what comes next because the music repeats itself. This is on a loop. And yet, each time that it comes back, it feels like it hits a little bit differently, at least for myself. And you have a very small and patient increase in incline of synth work that kind of works its way inside as well. I think that it's just a very beautiful, small escalation of sound. At 16 minutes long, it is the longest track on the album, but I always find myself wanting more. And I usually get more because by the time I realize I'm wanting more, the song's only like at 5 minutes. So I still have 11 minutes more to go. But I think that's kind of the magic of this album, is kind of captured in the first song. It leaves you wanting more if you enjoy what you hear in the first minute. And Eno, in talking about producing this particular song, he said that he had four musicians who couldn't hear each other, and that also he couldn't necessarily hear. But in the recording of the musicians as they were playing piano, there were apparently two melodies in there that kind of intersected and intertwined together that he really liked. So we kind of put those two together, kind of slowed them down, and that's where we kind of get these soft tones of the piano and these slow and mellow drifts of just beautiful bliss that kind of float around you. 2-1, the second song on the album, kind of changes things a little bit and changes the whole scope. At first we had these beautiful soft and pillowy tones of just heavenly bliss with the pianos and the ambience that kind of dwelled around them. But in 2-1, we're introduced to the human voice. In this song, we have three females who are harmonizing alongside Eno, and the way that their vocals are manipulated and layered, they have some sort of like synthy, distorted tone in the voices that kind of add this beautiful regal echo into the song. Just as all the songs on the album is very repetitious, but I feel like even though they repeat the same things, they feel different each time that they come back. And in my mind, I'm like, how does Eno do it? And in looking at the way he produces the album, yes, they're repeated, but there are small, minute changes, whether that's the timing of the loops just being slightly different each time, or small changes in the melody that you would barely even notice. I feel like the man is a scientist and a genius when it comes to this kind of thing. And the vocals carry this very spacey and almost mystical tone about them that once again, after those soft tones of the first song, these just kind of lift you a little bit higher. And I think it's interesting how in this song, Eno chooses a completely different sound. He doesn't build up from the first song that he did. He completely changes the sound, keeps the mood of it, but changes the sound. One of my favorite things about the album, though, is 1-2, which takes basically the elements of the previous two tracks, the vocals and the piano, and basically shows you them combined, bringing them together in this really, really beautiful and kind of epic amalgamation and combination and mixture of piano and vocals, of depth and ambience. The two elements kind of merge into a new life form, and the music kind of takes its own life. Well, takes like life into its own hands. Like it begins life. So once again, we return to these two elements, the simplicity and slow drift of the piano, and then the slow and gentle levity of the vocals, adding this beautiful, distinct, and divine tone. And then finally, we move into the last track, the fourth track, 2-2, which once again introduces a totally new element. This would be Eno playing on the ARP 2600 synthesizer, and with this he creates this near symphonic, still ambient, still quiet, but just a little bit more epic, symphonic meditation of sound and tones and deliverance. He explores a little bit more of the space, in particular in this song. He doesn't leave as much to the imagination, but once again, listen to the construction, the creativity, and the structure of it. The structure of it is almost non-existent because of those minute changes that we've talked about before. But in the same sense, there is structure. Just as your heartbeat doesn't beat the exact same rhythm your whole life, these songs, yes, they repeat, you know they're going to repeat, but they don't exactly follow that model. This song features very deep and rich tones, and like I mentioned, it explores a little bit more of the space, the depth, the heights of what Eno is willing to create in this album. I think that this is just a really brilliant album. You can either love it or hate it. There's no lyrics in the album, so let's just jump into my favorite moments and my song rankings. My favorite moment is from 1-1. I guess this is a repeating melody, but specifically if you want to catch the first one, I believe it's about at 112 in the album, and it's after the run in the piano. There's just a few little notes that come in on the end before it kind of echoes all the way and drifts into the space of the song that I look forward to those every single time that I listen to this album, and they still hit and resonate just as much today as they did years and years and years ago when I first listened to this album. And what those tones kind of do is it kind of grounds the melody after you've just been lifted. It kind of brings you back down a little bit, puts you down to a rest before it begins to slowly lift you up again, like a plane coming down and then lifting off again. My song rankings for the album are 1-1, 1-2, 2-2, and 2-1. I can see how you may get a little bit spaced out, a little bit bored maybe on the album, but when it comes to ambient music, I feel like the way that the music hits you depends on where you're listening to it, where and how you're listening to it, and where your mind's at when you're listening to it. This is music that, to me, the spaces that are left in it are filled by you, are filled by your mind, where you're at, your personal life at the time. It's kind of like the controversy of John Cage and 433. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. But is it really? What is the music? Now, there's not as much left to the imagination in this album as, John Cage's 433. But I feel like the concept in some parts is the same, in which your mind is left to fill in certain spaces. So you may listen to this album at one point and be like, that was kind of boring. But then you may listen to it at another point and you're like, that was prophetic. The music is adaptive towards you. The music is adaptive towards me. And pretty much every time that I've listened to it throughout the few years that I have listened to it, it's always hit me. I've always enjoyed it. It's one that I can always come back to and know that I'm going to love it for all its 42 minutes, which, by the way, to me, goes by really quick. He allowed the music to grow organically on its own. And in a sense, it feels different every time that we listen to it. So if you haven't listened to this album yet, I encourage you to listen to it in whatever environment you feel comfortable listening to it. I definitely suggest in like maybe a quiet hike or, at an airport. Realize what the music is trying to accomplish. To fill in the gaps in life, which is already happening. To fill in the gaps in the moment to moment and the day to day. Not to overtake, but perhaps more so to balance and bring a little bit more life and light into. I hope that you guys enjoyed the album review. You can join me on Twitter. You can join me in the comments down below. I hope that you're having a fantastic day. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye.